This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. My name is Emory Gillespie, and I'm the pastor at the Presbyterian Church in Monticello, Iowa, and I welcome you to this sermon for April 25th, 2020. We continue to stay in this sort of long hallway of the coronavirus and the quarantine. It's a lot of the same old, isn't it? And I'm thinking about you, and I know that you're thinking about me. Our story today from the scripture is from the Gospel of John, so it's toward the back of the Bible, and it's chapter 6, and it's the feeding of the 5,000. It's a story many of you know. It's a story about a lot of folks were around Jesus. He's healing people. He's teaching people. And then his disciples come to him and they say, everybody is hungry. It's dinner time, and what are we going to do? And if we were going to feed all these people, it would cost half of a year's salary. Many of you are working in businesses where you're feeding people, making sure that we're fed, and the cost of that, and the cost in your life of those kinds of things, and providing that for people. So we thank you for that. Andrew, if your name is Andrew, here's your shining moment. He steps up to Jesus and he says, yeah, but there's this little boy, and he has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Now, what he meant by that were 2 tiny fish, like sardines, and barley loaves, which was the bread for poor people, the sort of the bottom rank of bread. You had really good bread, kind of meal bread, barley bread was the bad stuff, not so great. It's so dry that you need that pickled fish to get it down. But it also has some other connotations. Barley was, we hear about it in Ruth. We hear about it in Ruth, where she is in the story in the Old Testament, where she is trying to woo Boaz, and she becomes the great grandmother of King David. So barley in that story and in others, it has this connotation of romance. It's a kind of like chocolate for Valentine's Day. It also has some other connotations too. It is considered to be it's a punishment for people who have been convicted of crimes that have to do with sexuality. So if you are convicted of, let's say, adultery in the Old Testament and the New Testament, then you're going to have to just give your offering. It can only be barley. So if you're bringing barley bread to the temple, or it has that connotation that you've been, you've stepped outside this moral code. So for this boy to step forward with this, he's saying a lot about himself, and he's taking a major risk. And even the Greek word for boy in this passage is it's a neutral word. So I'm wondering if he's a boy at all. I don't even know, but he steps forward, and the word has to do with being a slave, servant. It's connected. The root of that word is connected with punishment, being mistreated. So here's this kid, mistreated, comes from who knows, and he's surrounded by this crowd of people who we don't know if they've treated him well or not. He really doesn't have any reason to give back to society. We know people like that, right? We know people who've in our own lives who've been beaten down by the harsh rules and injustices of society. And yet here he is. Somehow he has reached into his pockets and found out I've got food, people are hungry, and I'm going to step up and offer my food. Quite the scene when you think of it that way. And he comes up to Jesus to offer him these gifts that say a lot about his story, that tell about who he is, where he came from, the struggles he's had, the injustices he's experienced. And Jesus says, thank you. And that word thank you becomes the word Eucharist. That moment where this child is bringing his whole story forward. A very vulnerable moment for him, I'm sure. Jesus thanks him for that, and that becomes a holy moment. That becomes, in fact, the way we celebrate Christ's presence with us all the time. In the early church, it was always fish and bread. It was never bread and wine. It was always fish and bread. And it always made people think back to this story of this kid who stepped up and was generous to the people who may not have been very generous to him. We're seeing that in our life today. We're seeing that around us all the time. People who are stepping up and being generous and being kind and being bigger than maybe they've been in their normal lives. And we're doing the same. Maybe we're doing it in a quiet way. Maybe you are doing it in a way that's not many people see. But you're that kid. We all are right now. We all are finding ourselves in a world that is not very friendly. It's got a virus, and the virus is loose, and it's not nice to us. And yet we're finding ways to be courageous. We put on our face masks, and we are generous of heart, even so. And that is what holiness is about. That's what living a life of faith is about. And indeed, we're just like that little boy, stepping out every day in a world that might not be so friendly. I hope all of you are doing well. I think about you a lot, family and friends all across the globe, and my heart goes with you. I'm wearing my Gay Pride necklace here in honor of this little boy, and I'm also, do I have it? I think I have it. Yeah. I wanted to show you this wonderful little sun catcher that our church is sending out to all the people who are homebound, stuck at home for a month or more now. Our hearts go with you. May God bless you and keep you. May God be gracious and kind to you. May God's face shine upon you and those you love, now and forevermore. Amen.